Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming along this morning. So my name's Stuart Wallace, and with my colleague James Kilburn, or JK, we're going to be talking to you this morning about nighttime SAR operations, or as we do them. Just a little quick introduction first. So JK works at our training college in Poole. We have a fantastic facility where all of our crews go through to do various courses at various stages in their careers. My title is Area Life-Saving Manager. I operate in an area of Northwest Wales and am responsible for, amongst other things, the RNLI's operational capability within that area. A little bit about who we are. In the UK, our tagline is, and indeed Ireland, our tagline is the charity that saves lives at sea. And it's important to note that we are a charity. We operate throughout the Channel Islands, the Republic of Ireland and the United Kingdom. We operate 237 lifeboat stations, some of them now actually inland, on inland lakes in Scotland and Ireland. And we do what we do through the operation of 13 classes of lifeboat or watercraft. We also lifeguard 220 beaches, some of them throughout the year, some through summer periods. And what's important to note, particularly in the context of what we're going to talk about, is 95% of our people are volunteers. They're not necessarily professional mariners. They come to us to volunteer into the role that they do. And specifically with regard to lifeboat operations, that means we have, I'll just check the figure, we have 4,700 people that are volunteer lifeboat crew.
Thank you very much. So over the last 3 years, stood in the wrong place again, we've had a number of incidents. Oh, what's happened? That's an incident.
Yeah.
Do you want me to get back to it? There we go. So yeah, over the last 3 years, we've had a number of high-speed incidents, and all of them have been at night. So what we'd just like to do is share some of our findings, the causes, and the actions that we've taken as an organisation to try and reduce the likelihood, really, of it happening again. So just to set a bit of a scene, on the 8th of May 2015, we launched just before midnight to a vessel that was stuck on fishing gear. No risk to life, no real need to rush. But in this picture, I'd just like to draw your attention to the significant amount of white light that we've used in and around the boathouse. On the next screenshot, the boat's just departed the station, and again, we've got a significant amount of white light. The brilliance from the chart plotter is set quite high, and the deck lights, which just illuminate the deck for nighttime working, are still on, which really, at this stage, they shouldn't be. In our final picture of this particular incident, we're moments before the point of impact. We're travelling at 34 knots. We're about half a mile away from the actual station, so very sort of soon after we'd launched. And you can see that the two crew are both facing the chart plotter. So one of them's putting the route into the plotter, and the other one's on the VHF, speaking to the Coast Guard, just finding further information out about the tasking, which is probably a fairly standard situation during most of our launches. So at this point, half a mile away from the station, 34 knots, no route in the plotter, we collided with this completely unlit post. And we sustained substantial damage to both the hull and to our crew. We're very lucky, really, when you have a look at the injuries that we sort of got away with, because they could have been much, much worse. About a year to the day, we had a very similar incident. Launched. Lots of light, white light, used in and around the station during the launch. About 60 seconds after proceeding from the station, again, they hit an unlit post. This time, more substantial damage to the vessel, and we were really lucky, to be honest, that the crew walked away with their lives in this particular instance. There were some significant injuries. So, most importantly, what did we learn? Well, we learned that operating in the hours of darkness significantly increases the risk to our crew. So as an organisation, we had to look at the navigation policies and how we're acting during nighttime operations. I mentioned during the first incident that the crew were putting the route into the plotter. So as part of our changes, we've updated our policies to state that at night time, the route must be in the plotter and finalised before they're allowed to proceed. And that was a big shift. Up until then, I think we've been historically using quite a lot of local knowledge, but both of the scenarios were within half a mile of the station or 60 seconds after launch. So something we really needed to focus on and change. We've also spent a bit of time increasing people's understanding about night vision and how the human eye is affected by white light. Both of the incidents were very shortly after launching, as mentioned a couple of times, so it was deemed that a contributing factor in not being able to see and avoid the post was the exposure to white light. So we've tried to change that, and we've tried to roll out red lights across all our changing rooms, crew rooms, boat halls, so that as soon as the crew respond from home, get to the station, they're no longer exposed to white light before launching. Probably the biggest thing we learned, though, is that we had a culture of speed. So what we've tried to do is change the whole mindset. Whereas historically our coxswains and helms tended to start with the idea of going flat out and slow down only when it was required because of the conditions, we tried to flip that on its head, and we've introduced what we call a standard operating speed of 20 knots. And the idea is that now our coxswains and helms start at 20 knots and then justify their actions to speed up. So we're not saying don't go faster. What we're saying is start slow and justify why we're speeding up, rather than starting with the intention of going flat out and slowing down. So that's a bit about what we've sort of learned from our two incidents, among other things. I'll hand over to Stuart, who's going to talk a little bit more about the policies.
So briefly, that's what we learned, but how do we actually put this into practice? And I started off by saying we're a charity, and that's quite important. Within the UK and within the Republic of Ireland, we have quite a lot of kudos from this. All of our advertising is about us, not about the people that we work. There's this great thing around the volunteer, and we almost put the volunteer on a pedestal to the extent where they feel because they're an RNLI coxswain, helm, crew, they can do no wrong. Everything, any mistakes we make, any regulations that we breach, we can get away with because we're brave volunteers risking our lives to go out to sea. And in the culture, I think of just about everywhere nowadays, that no longer holds true. We've got to be seen to be compliant. It's a difficult thing to do with volunteers, people who give up their time, who give up their time to train, their weekends to go on courses, etc., to say that actually what we want you to do for part of this is to sit down and read policy documents. It's not all about going to sea, it's not all about taking a boat out, but this is vitally important. So I'm not, in the time we've got, I'm not going to go through all of this. And I think those of you, certainly those of you that sat in uniform, those of you that well, all work for professional organisations, but this may be sitting rather uncomfortably with you. Why in 2018 have we got somebody talking about the implementation of regulations? It's because of that volunteer ethos, and it's getting through to people that whilst we respect and value what they do, it's got to be done properly and professionally. And this has been around since the year dot as to how many people actually can go out in an operational lifeboat, and these are various classes of what we operate. But the reason we put this up is particularly from the lessons that we have learnt recently. We've highlighted particularly the number that operate in a boat at night. And these boats, the B class, the D class, and the E class, are all our inshore RIB, if you will, operational boats.
Thank you. So during training and development, as Stuart's already said, we got about 4,500 volunteers, or operational volunteers. So how do we take these people from all walks of life who aren't necessarily a maritime background and turn them into a professional and efficient lifeboat service? 90% of our crews have a non-maritime background, so increasingly the answer to that sort of conundrum is effective training, assessment, and also continuing to ensure we assess not just once but periodically to ensure they stay at that standard. What we created is a fairly extensive standards document. So within every lifeboat station, every role is defined. So from somebody who's a shore crew, helps getting the boat in the water, to a tractor driver, to a helm, to a coxswain, to a crew member, is assigned a development plan. And within the development plan, it breaks their role down into a number of skill sets. What we've got as an example on the board at the moment is a crew member, and their skill set is broken down into 37 different units of knowledge or skill, which they will be trained in, and then 3 yearly they will be assessed in to ensure they're at the standard, they're trained to the standard, and then maintained at a set standard all the way through. Another thing we've changed from the incidents that I mentioned is we've changed the way in which we assess navigation. Historically, depending on the day that your assessor rocks up at station, would depend on the conditions in which you'd be assessed in. Whereas now, for anybody who's in charge of a lifeboat for navigation, so whether it be the helm, the coxswain, or the navigator, they're assessed in a range of conditions. So until they've demonstrated competence in both day, night, and in restricted visibility, they're not deemed as competent as a navigator, a coxswain, or a helm. In addition to that, we've tried to create resources. So Stuart mentioned and highlighted the new policies that we've created, and one of which is during nighttime operations, the route must be in the plotter before proceeding. So the check cards that we've created are on board the boat to remind people and to give them an easily accessible way of checking that they are following those regulations. So that's a little bit of the work we've done around training, making sure the standards are correct, and making sure the resources are there to support them.
Thank you. So with seconds to spare, we actually get to what we've been asked to talk about, which is nighttime SAR operations. The reason we've had this build up into it is to demonstrate what we've learned from it going wrong at night, how we train, how we develop our people and put them in a position to be able to do this. And the short summary of this, the executive summary of this is it's difficult, and feel free to add any expletive you want to that sentence. It is very difficult to do this. So these diagrams are derived from the International Maritime Organisation's SAR manual, International Maritime Search and Rescue Manual. This is how we in the UK and Ireland work with the respective coast guards in that area. We are a declared asset to those coast guards. They task us. We don't decide to go and do what it is we feel we ought to be doing. And most of the time, almost all of the time, they will tell us what they want to do. They will give us a position, Alpha Bravo, Charlie Delta, bound it, give us the course, give us the distance, and tell us this is what we want you to do. That may be in conjunction with other vessels, maybe in conjunction with aviation. What's important for what I want to talk about, and these 3 slides are now in a little bit of a jumble because it's difficult to decide which order they come into, but it's this bit here, the space between these legs. On a day like today, in the visibility we've got out there, depending on what we're searching for, person in the water, a fishing vessel on fire, whatever it may be, that distance will be set, but you've obviously got a lot of latitude with what it can be. Doing that on a bad night in North Europe, in the dark, in the rain, what is that distance? So if we haven't got all the information from the Coast Guard, or it's all happening in a bit of a rush, we do have within our manuals on board the ability to derive it ourselves. And this is an excerpt from a table that goes on and on. So we'll see for PIW as person in the water, life rafts, smaller vessels, and then it builds up from there. The number of person, life raft, the size of the vessel. It then, depending on the visibility that we can see, it gives us that distance, well, not quite that distance, but I'll come back to that in a minute, in nautical miles. So the lowest we go, 0.2 of a nautical mile, 370 meters. Even that low at night, looking for a person in the water, when you're looking for that, and you might have a sea of that, and they may be a scuba diver that's been missing. So they'll have a hood on, a black neoprene hood on, and you're looking for that. And you're still giving yourself 370 meters to do that in nighttime. It's very difficult. So this figure here, I talked about the track spacing before, the distance between these lines. That is derived from this sweep width, the distance that we can see. Even on all of those best calculations that we've got, that is effectively the beam of the boat. Because if you're looking for that diver in a black neoprene hood and you're looking for that much of them, unless you actually touch them, the chances are that you won't see them, and that's the difficulty. This figure is what these calculations are worked on. So in good visibility in daytime, with those calculated distances, you have a 79% chance of finding the casualty. At night time, that is significantly reduced. And just to demonstrate this, I'm just going to do a quick few-minute case study. So this is Rhyl in North Wales. Not particularly, compare this area of the sea to the Swedish archipelago. It's not particularly constrained, but actually a growing number of wind farms, offshore renewable energy developments. The main navigational channel into the port of Liverpool comes over the top of here, and this does get very shallow around this part. So a number of considerations to launch. Several years ago, they launched late evening in autumn time to the report of a missing leisure craft that was fishing with 2 persons and a dog on board. So they launched their Mersey-class lifeboat, and they were out searching for the next 18 hours for these persons. Quite not a great outcome. The dog was lost, and of the 2 persons on board, one was recovered, and the other's body was found several days later elsewhere. But what was interesting, and what feeds in to how we do this, is when they found the survivor, he'd reported through the night on several occasions hearing the helicopter directly overhead of him, and of having the searchlight from the lifeboat flash across his face on a number of occasions. So they were that close, and they didn't get to him. And I'm not criticising the boat. They were doing all of the right things. And it seems a bit of an anathema at the High Speed Boat Operations Forum. What I'm going to say is there's nothing high speed about this at all. It is about taking it right back down, slowing it right down. So follow the search pattern by all means, but stop and listen in complete silence. Then shout. Then stop and listen in complete silence. And complete silence means VHFs turned down. Even on still night, turning the radar off so you haven't got the sound of the scanner above you. Complete silence to do it. Be very careful with the use of your searchlights. That report of flashing across the face, it needs to be a very measured, very slow movement. The same if you're using night vision. And then finally, flare. We're running out of time, and we've had some very interesting discussions over the last day or 2 about the use of flare. We currently, in the RNLI, don't use it. Doesn't mean we reject it. There's lots of reasons behind that. But our colleagues in the Coast Guard in their helicopters do, and so we rely on that to a certain extent. But again, any use of technology, you've got to understand exactly what it's doing and exactly what it's showing you and how to use it. Because if the simple use of a searchlight can miss somebody, you need to be sure of what you're doing. That's us. Thank you very much.